Zaire Achabi was 41 years old, and according to the documents his wife had just signed, earned a salary of $187,450 a year as a senior IT infrastructure consultant. He lived in a tastefully restored 4-bedroom house in Chastain Park, a home worth about $1.2 million, which they had purchased 10 years prior with a significant down payment from his savings. He drove a 2018 Honda Accord with 94,000 miles on it. He wore an $89 Timex Weekender watch. And at 7:14 p.m. on a rainy Tuesday in October, his life, as he had known it for the past 12 years, was ending. His wife, Devin, stood by the door, her silhouette framed by the dim porch light. She was wearing a $3,200 Max Mara coat, a recent purchase she justified as a necessary investment for her new life. Next to her were 3 pieces of Louis Vuitton luggage, a matching set that had cost him nearly $11,000 5 years ago for their anniversary. He remembered the look on her face when she'd unwrapped them, a flicker of pleasure, quickly replaced by the familiar assessment of whether it was enough. Outside, idling at the curb of their quiet tree-lined street, was a gleaming white BMW M8, a car with a starting price of $138,800. In the driver's seat was Marcus, a man Zaire had met twice. Marcus worked in investment banking at Goldman Sachs. He wore $500 Salvatore Ferragamo shoes and talked about his portfolio in a way that was meant to sound casual, but was meticulously curated to project success. "I've signed the papers, Zaire," Devin said, her voice devoid of the warmth he once cherished. It was brittle, transactional. "They're on the kitchen island. My lawyer says it's a standard no-fault dissolution. Given our assets, it should be quick." Zaire said nothing. He just looked at her, at the woman whose hair he used to braid, the woman he'd nursed through a nasty bout of pneumonia 2 winters ago, the woman for whom he'd built a custom walk-in closet with cedar shelving because she'd once mentioned offhandedly that she loved the smell. His hands, calloused from years of woodworking and gardening, were steady at his sides. She took his silence as acquiescence, or perhaps weakness. "Look, I know this is hard to understand," she continued, a sigh of practiced impatience escaping her lips. "But I need more. I deserve more. Marcus, he gets it. He has ambition. We're aligned." She gestured vaguely toward the window, toward the expensive car and the man inside it. "It's an upgrade, Zaire. It's just what it is. An upgrade." The words hung in the air of their home, a space filled with memories Zaire had thought were shared. He thought of the Saturday mornings spent at the farmer's market, of the nights they'd watched old movies on the worn leather sofa, of the quiet comfort he'd mistaken for love. All of it, apparently, was just a placeholder until something better came along. He nodded slowly, his face an unreadable mask of calm. This composure seemed to irritate her more than any outburst would have. She wanted a fight, a scene, something to validate her decision, to paint him as the unreasonable one. He refused to give it to her. "My things are packed. The movers will be here for the furniture I'm taking on Thursday," she said, pulling on her leather gloves. "The list is with the papers. It's all very reasonable." Zaire finally spoke, his voice quiet but clear in the sudden stillness of the room. "Okay, Devin." That was it. Just her name. The simplicity of it seemed to throw her off balance. She stared at him for a moment, searching for a crack in his facade. Finding none, she turned and opened the door, letting in a gust of cold, damp air that smelled of rain and exhaust from the BMW. She walked out, pulling her expensive coat tight around her, and did not look back. Zaire stood there long after the red taillights of the M8 disappeared down the street. He walked over to the kitchen island. There they were, the dissolution papers, neatly stacked next to a smaller sheet of paper, a handwritten list of assets she was claiming, a $4,500 Peloton bike, a $6,000 Eames lounge chair, half the value of their art collection, which she estimated at around $50,000. It was a list compiled by a woman who believed her husband's entire net worth was tied up in a $1.2 million house and a retirement account with maybe a few $100,000 in it. He picked up the papers, his thumb brushing over her signature. He felt a profound sense of emptiness, a hollowed-out feeling that echoed in the silent house. She had no idea how wrong she was. Devin thought she was leaving a mid-level IT consultant for a high-flying investment banker. She thought she had traded a comfortable life for a spectacular one. What she didn't know, what she had never once suspected in 12 years of marriage, was that she had just walked away from Zaire Achebe, the founder and sole owner of a silent portfolio of tech and real estate holdings valued at just over $2 billion. She had just left Atlanta's richest black man, and she had done it for a man she called an upgrade. Have you ever felt completely underestimated? Share a time in the comments when someone misjudged you and what happened next. We read every story. The facade had been Zaire's sanctuary. It wasn't built to deceive Devin specifically, but to protect a part of himself that the money could never touch. He'd made his first fortune at 26, developing a data compression algorithm that he sold to a major tech firm for $80 million in stock. Instead of buying a mansion and a fleet of cars, he'd hired a discreet wealth management firm in Delaware and continued living in his modest apartment, driving his used Toyota. He poured that initial seed money into a series of strategic, anonymous investments over the next 15 years. Early stakes in cloud computing startups, undervalued commercial real estate in burgeoning tech hubs, and a significant portion in a private equity fund that specialized in logistics infrastructure. The wealth grew exponentially, quietly, managed through a series of trusts, and holding companies so complex that his own name appeared on almost nothing directly. His public-facing life was as Zaire Achebe, the independent IT consultant. It was a real job. He took on 3 or 4 major corporate clients a year, enough to generate a legitimate income of around $180,000. It kept him sharp, and more importantly, it kept him grounded. It was how he met people without the distorting lens of extreme wealth. It was how he had met Devin. They'd been introduced by a mutual friend at a charity gala. He was there as a guest of a client. She was working in marketing for a luxury brand, her eyes bright with ambition. He was struck by her confidence, her luminous, deep brown skin that glowed under the ballroom lights. He loved the way she laughed. For the first few years, things were good. They built a life together in the Chastain Park house. He found joy in the simple, domestic routines. But slowly, the cracks began to appear. Tiny fissures in the foundation of their marriage that he had tried to ignore. They were always about money, or more accurately, the perception of it. He remembered one evening, about 4 years into their marriage. They were getting ready for a dinner party at the home of one of her colleagues. He was putting on his Timex, the one with the worn nylon strap. She paused from applying her $85 Chanel lipstick and looked at his wrist with disdain. "Are you really wearing that?" she asked, her tone sharp. "Zaire, we're going to be around people who matter. Her husband is a partner at King & Spalding. Can't you at least wear the Rolex I got you?" The Rolex was a $14,000 Submariner she'd bought him for his 35th birthday, using their joint credit card. He knew it was less a gift for him and more a prop for her. He wore it twice to make her happy, but it felt alien on his wrist. "I like this watch, Devin," he'd said calmly. "It works." "It's not about it working," she'd snapped, turning back to the mirror. "It's about what it says. That watch says you don't care. It's embarrassing." The word embarrassing became a common refrain. His 2018 Honda Accord was embarrassing. His preference for cooking at home instead of dining at 400 a plate restaurants in Buckhead was embarrassing. His lack of interest in designer clothes, he preferred his well-worn jeans and simple cotton shirts, was a constant source of her frustration. "You have a good job," she'd say, her voice laced with a confusion that bordered on contempt. "You make good money. Why don't you want to look like it? Don't you want people to know you're successful?" He'd always tried to explain it in a way she might understand. "I find value in other things. Quality, simplicity, things that last." But she couldn't see it. To Devin, value was a price tag. Success was a logo. Her own spending reflected this philosophy. There was the aforementioned $3,200 Max Mara coat, the $11,000 luggage set, a collection of designer handbags that collectively cost more than his car, a $5,500 Celine, a $4,800 Saint Laurent, a $6,200 Bottega Veneta. He never denied her these things. Their joint account, funded solely by his consulting salary, could comfortably afford them, though it left little for savings. He saw it as her choice, her way of finding happiness. He had no idea it was also her way of measuring his worth and finding it wanting. The introduction of Marcus into their lives was the catalyst. They met him at a fundraiser for the High Museum of Art. Marcus was everything Devin secretly craved. He drove the flashy car, wore the tailored $8,000 Brioni suit, and casually mentioned his vacation home in the Hamptons. He zeroed in on Devin immediately, recognizing a shared language of luxury and status. Zaire watched it happen from across the room, a cold knot forming in his stomach. He saw how Devin's posture changed around Marcus, how she laughed a little louder, how she touched his arm when he spoke. He saw the way Marcus looked at Zaire's simple navy blazer and Timex watch, a flicker of dismissal in his eyes. The final, brutal scene before she left had been a dinner at their house. She had insisted on inviting Marcus and his date. Zaire had spent the afternoon cooking his specialty, a slow-braised oxtail stew, a recipe passed down from his grandmother. The house was filled with the rich, savory aroma. When Marcus arrived, he sniffed the air and chuckled. "Smells rustic," he said, handing Devin a bottle of wine. It was a Screaming Eagle Cabernet Sauvignon, a bottle that cost upwards of $4,000. "Thought we could have something a little more sophisticated," Devin beamed, placing the bottle on the counter like a trophy. "Oh, Marcus, you shouldn't have. Zaire was just making his comfort food thing." Throughout the dinner, she and Marcus dominated the conversation, talking about stock options, European travel, and mutual acquaintances in the world of high finance. Zaire became a spectator in his own home. At one point, Marcus turned to him, a patronizing smile on his face. "So, Zaire," he began, swirling the expensive wine in his glass, "Devin tells me you're in IT, servers and stuff, right? Must be stable work." "It is," Zaire said evenly, refusing to take the bait. "That's great. Stability is important," Marcus said, sharing a look with Devin. The subtext was clear: stable, quaint, unambitious. Devin jumped in, her voice bright and brittle. "Zaire is very content. He doesn't have that fire, you know? That drive to conquer. I've been trying to get him to level up, maybe start his own consultancy, aim a little higher, but he's happy with his little projects." His little projects. One of those little projects was the quiet acquisition of a controlling interest in a data center company that was about to secure a multi-billion-dollar government contract, a deal that would increase his net worth by nearly 20%. But he just smiled, a tight, knowing smile that only he understood. "I like my work," he said. "It's fulfilling." Marcus had laughed, a short, sharp sound of disbelief. "Fulfilling, right. Listen, buddy, in this world, you're either a shark or you're fish food. You can't be fulfilled on $180 grand a year in a city like Atlanta. You can only be falling behind. 2 weeks later, Devin was gone. The cruelty wasn't just in her leaving. It was in the 12 years of 1,000 tiny cuts, of being made to feel small, of his quiet, simple life being judged as a failure. She hadn't just left a man. She had left a life she fundamentally disdained, a life she considered beneath her. And in doing so, she had made the single greatest miscalculation of her entire life. The 4 months that followed Devin's departure were a study in quiet restraint. October bled into November, the vibrant autumn leaves of Chastain Park turning brown and brittle, carpeting the ground in a melancholy blanket. Zaire moved through his days with a deliberate, almost monastic routine. He woke at 5:30 a.m., went for a run as the sun cast a pale, watery light over the city, and was at his home office desk by 7 a.m. He didn't work on his consulting projects. Instead, he dove deep into the architecture of his empire. He spent hours on secure video calls with his family office team in Delaware, with his attorneys, with his portfolio managers. They spoke in a language of acquisitions, divestitures, and projected yields. He analyzed market trends, approved capital allocations, and made decisions that shifted tens of millions of dollars with a quiet click of his mouse. To an outside observer, he was just a man in a quiet room, staring at a screen. In reality, he was a king surveying his kingdom, a kingdom Devin never knew existed. He hired a moving company, not the one Devin had scheduled, but a high-end firm that specialized in discreet relocations. On the Thursday she was supposed to have her things moved, he had them carefully pack every item on her list, plus every other personal effect she'd left behind. Her clothes, her books, her half-used bottles of expensive perfume. He paid the $3,800 fee and had it all sent to a secure, climate-controlled storage unit. He then sent Devin a simple text message with the address and the key code. "Your belongings are here? Let me know when you've retrieved them so I can close the account." Her reply was instant, dripping with indignation. "You couldn't even wait for my movers? You had to have it all thrown out?" He didn't bother correcting her. He simply let her believe what she wanted. It was easier that way. The house felt cavernous without her. The silence was a physical presence. He'd walk past the closet he'd built for her, and the faint scent of her perfume would catch him off guard, a ghost of a memory that brought a dull ache to his chest. The pain was real. He had loved her, or at least, he had loved the woman he thought she was in the beginning. He wasn't a machine. The betrayal cut deep. But his grief was a quiet, private thing. He processed it not with anger, but with a cold, clear-eyed focus on the future. He saw his lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Eleanor Vance, whose firm had handled his corporate structures for over a decade. Her office was in a sleek glass tower in Buckhead, a world away from his quiet Chastain Park home. Eleanor, a regal black woman with her hair in elegant silver locks, reviewed the dissolution papers Devin had left. "This is remarkably straightforward," Eleanor said, a hint of amusement in her voice. She adjusted her $1,200 Cartier glasses. "She's not asking for alimony, just a division of marital assets based on your stated income. The house is your biggest shared asset. She's entitled to half its equity." "She can have it," Zaire said. The equity was about $800,000. He could write her a check for $400,000 tomorrow and not even notice. "And she's claiming these items," Eleanor continued, looking at the handwritten list. "The Peloton, the chair, some art, all purchased during the marriage." "Fine," Zaire said. Eleanor leaned back in her chair, her expression turning serious. "Zaire, you know that if she had any inkling of your actual worth, this would be a very different conversation. She would hire a forensic accounting team that would tear your life apart trying to pierce the corporate veil. It would be a multi-year, multi-million-dollar war." "I know," he said. That's why I've lived the way I have." "The pre-nuptial agreement is ironclad," Eleanor confirmed, tapping a thick, bound document on her desk. "And more importantly, the Achebe Trust was established and fully funded 2 years before you even met her. All appreciation of those assets, all income generated by the trust, has flowed into separate, non-marital accounts. You've been meticulous. There is nothing she can legally touch." He nodded. "Just handle the paperwork, Eleanor. Give her exactly what she asked for. Not a penny more, not a penny less. Be fair, be firm, and be final." He left her office and drove home, the city lights of Atlanta blurring past his window. He felt a strange sense of detachment, as if he were watching a movie of his own life. The man who had just calmly discussed the dissolution of his 12-year marriage felt disconnected from the man who was now trying to decide what to make for dinner. It was this duality that had protected him. It had created a firewall between his heart and his fortune. Now it was a firewall between his past and his future. He spent Christmas alone. He donated what he would have spent on Devon's gift, usually in the range of $10,000 to $20,000, to a local food bank. He received a few texts from mutual friends, awkward messages wishing him well. He knew the story Devin was telling, the story of the ambitious, vibrant woman held back by her content, unambitious husband. The story of her brave escape to a life she deserved. He let them believe it. The truth, he knew, had a way of revealing itself. He just had to be patient. He had no idea how soon and how publicly that revelation would come. February in Atlanta can be a tease, a fickle dance between the last gasps of winter and the first promises of spring. On a particularly bright, cold afternoon, the 17th of the month, the truth finally arrived. It didn't knock politely on the door. It exploded across the digital world with the force of a tectonic shift. Devin was in the Alpharetta apartment she now shared with Marcus. It was a modern 2-bedroom rental in a new complex, the kind with a resort-style pool and a shared gym. The rent was $2,800 a month, a cost Marcus covered with an air of magnanimous generosity. It was smaller than the Chastain Park house, with thin walls and a view of a parking garage, but to Devin, it was the price of admission to a better life. She was scrolling through Twitter on her iPad, sipping a glass of Sauvignon Blanc, waiting for Marcus to get home from the office. Her feed was the usual mix of fashion bloggers, celebrity gossip, and news from financial journalists. A headline from WealthX, a reputable financial intelligence company, caught her eye. It was being retweeted by several prominent Atlanta business figures, Atlanta's hidden giants, the new billionaires reshaping the South's wealth landscape. Intrigued, she clicked the link. The article opened with a glossy photo of the Atlanta skyline. It spoke of the city's booming tech and logistics sectors, creating a new class of ultra-high-net-worth individuals who operated largely outside the public eye. "Forget the old money of Tuxedo Park," the article read. "The real power in Atlanta now resides with a new generation of quiet titans, entrepreneurs who built their empires in the digital shadows." She scrolled down, past profiles of a biotech mogul and a private equity founder, and then she saw it. A name that made the blood drain from her face: Zaire Achebe. Net worth $214 billion. It had to be a mistake, a different Zaire Achebe. But there was a photo, a candid shot of him at a tech conference 2 years ago that a colleague had taken. He was smiling, his neat locks framing a face she knew better than her own. He was wearing a simple dark sweater that she now realized was probably a $1,200 Loro Piana cashmere piece he wore like a sweatshirt. Her breath hitched. The wine glass slipped from her numb fingers, shattering on the polished concrete floor. She didn't hear it. Her entire world had narrowed to the screen of her iPad. She read the paragraph under his name, her mind struggling to process the words. The most enigmatic figure on our list, Zaire Achebe, 41, is the sole owner of Achebe Holdings, a Delaware-based family office with a vast and diversified portfolio. With early significant investments in cloud infrastructure, enterprise software as a service, SaaS companies, and a network of logistics and distribution centers across the Sun Belt, Achebe has quietly amassed a fortune estimated by WealthX to be in excess of $2 billion. A source close to his operations describes him as the quietest person in the room and also the most powerful. He maintains a low public profile, working as an independent IT consultant in Atlanta, a role that sources say allows him to keep a ground-level view of industry trends. $2 billion. The words pulsed in her mind, nonsensical and overwhelming. 2 billion, 2,000 million. It was a number so large, it was an abstraction. She thought of the arguments over his $89 Timex watch. She thought of her condescending lectures about his lack of ambition. She thought of him in his 2018 Honda Accord, a car he could have purchased 10,000 times over with a single day's interest. She thought of her last words to him. "It's an upgrade, Zaire." A wave of nausea so powerful it made her dizzy washed over her. She had been married to one of the wealthiest men in the country, a self-made billionaire, and she had treated him like a failure. She had mocked his humility, scorned his simplicity, and mistaken his contentment for weakness. Marcus walked in then, whistling, loosening his tie. "Hey, babe, what's for—" He stopped, seeing her pale face, the shattered glass on the floor. "What happened? You look like you've seen a ghost." She couldn't speak. She just held up the iPad, her hand trembling so violently the screen shook. He took it from her, his eyes scanning the article. His confident swagger evaporated. He read the entry under Zaire's name, then read it again. The color drained from his face. He looked from the iPad to Devin, and for the first time, she saw him look at her not with desire or admiration, but with a cold, calculating assessment. He was an investment banker, after all, and he had just realized his latest acquisition was a catastrophic liability. He had hitched his wagon to the woman who had fumbled the winning lottery ticket of a lifetime. $2 billion? Marcus whispered, the words catching in his throat. He looked around their rented $2,800 a month apartment, and she could see the wheels turning in his head. He wasn't looking at a home. He was looking at a balance sheet, and it was deeply, irrevocably in the red. Devin's mind, finally catching up to the horror of her situation, fixated on a single desperate thought. We're still married. The divorce isn't final. She scrambled for her phone, her fingers fumbling with the screen. She had to call Zaire. She had to fix this. It was a mistake. A terrible, horrible mistake. She pressed his name in her contacts list and listened to the phone ring, her heart hammering against her ribs. It rang once, twice, 3 times. Then it went to voicemail. "Zaire? Zaire, it's me," she began, her voice a strained, unnatural whisper. I saw an article. I think we need to talk. Call me back, please." She hung up and immediately tried again. Voicemail. She tried a third time. Voicemail. The silence on the other end of the line was more terrifying than any angry words could ever be. It was the silence of a door not just closed, but locked, bolted, and soundproofed. She had no idea that Zaire wasn't even seeing her calls. He had already set a rule on his phone to send her number directly to voicemail. He had made his decision the day she walked out. The strike had been launched months ago. She was just now feeling the impact. Zaire was in his garden when the article went live. He knew it was coming. The research team from WealthX had contacted his family office weeks ago. His team, following his long-standing protocol, had confirmed the basic, verifiable facts without offering any additional commentary. He had chosen not to fight the publication. At some point in the modern world, this level of wealth was impossible to hide forever. Perhaps it was better for it to come out on his terms, in a dry, factual report, rather than a messy public spectacle. He was pruning his rose bushes, the late afternoon sun warm on his back. His phone, which he'd left on the patio table, began to vibrate incessantly. He didn't need to look at it to know who was calling. He could feel the seismic shift all the way from his quiet corner of Chastain Park. The private king was now a public figure. The facade was gone. He finished trimming a final, errant branch, his movements calm and precise. He cleaned his shears with an oiled cloth, coiled the garden hose, and went inside. He poured himself a glass of iced tea and finally picked up the phone. 47 missed calls from Devin. A string of frantic text messages, dozens of notifications from news alerts and social media. He didn't read the texts, he didn't listen to the voicemails. He simply opened his email and wrote a short message to Eleanor Vance. Subject, Devin Achabe. Eleanor, I imagine my estranged wife will be contacting you shortly if she hasn't already. She has likely become aware of my financial situation, which was made public today. Please proceed with the dissolution, as we discussed. Offer her exactly the terms she originally agreed to. Do not deviate. All further communication from her or any legal counsel she may retain should be directed to your office. Thank you, Zaire. He hit send. It was a simple, unemotional act, but it was the final move in a game Devin never even knew she was playing. He had built a fortress around his life, and she had willingly walked out of it, believing the world outside was grander. Now she was on the other side of the wall, and the gate was irrevocably closed. The voicemails that accumulated over the next 48 hours told the story of a mind unraveling. Zaire had his assistant transcribe them into a single document, which he read with a dispassionate sense of finality. Voicemail 1, Feb 17, 4:52 p.m. Panicked, breathless. Zaire, it's me. I saw an article. I think we need to talk. It's obviously some kind of mistake, a typo or something, right? Call me back, please. Voicemail 2, Feb 17, 4:58 p.m. Voice higher, strained. Okay, I just saw it on Forbes too. Zaire, what is going on? You need to call me. We need to get ahead of this. People are going crazy. My phone is blowing up. Voicemail 3, Feb 17, 5:15 p.m. Pleading, the anger seeping in. Why aren't you answering me? This changes things, Zaire. This changes everything. We are still married. The divorce is not final. You can't just pretend I don't exist. Voicemail 4, Feb 17, 6:30 p.m. Weeping. Please, Zai, please pick up. I made a mistake. A terrible, terrible mistake. I was unhappy. I was confused. Marcus is nothing. He means nothing. I love you. I've always loved you. I was just lost. We can fix this. I know we can. I'll leave him tonight. I'll come home. Voicemail 5, Feb 18, 9:12 a.m. Cold, hard fury. I've been calling you for hours. I left Marcus. I'm at a hotel. And you won't even give me the dignity of a response? Fine. You want to be this way? I've spoken to a lawyer, a real lawyer. You lied to me for 12 years. You misrepresented your entire life. That's fraud, Zaire. You owe me. And believe me, I will get what I am owed. You will not get away with this. Voicemail 6, Feb 18, 3:45 p.m. Exhausted, defeated. My lawyer called your lawyer. She told him about the trust, the prenup. She said I'm entitled to nothing but what was in the papers. Zaire, how could you? How could you watch me walk away, knowing everything? How could you let me throw my life away? Why didn't you stop me? That last question was the one that echoed in the silence of his study. Why didn't you stop me? He leaned back in his chair, the transcribed words on his screen blurring slightly, because stopping her would have meant she was only staying for the money, because he had to know if the woman he married loved Zaire, the man who wore a Timex and drove a Honda, or if she was just waiting for an upgrade. He had his answer. The price of that knowledge had been his marriage, but the clarity it provided was priceless. The consequences for Devin cascaded swiftly and brutally. Eleanor Vance sent her new high-priced divorce attorney a single, concise letter. It outlined the impeccable legal standing of Zaire's premarital assets and the trust. It included a copy of the original dissolution agreement, which Devin had signed, agreeing to the division of assets based on their shared marital life, the life funded by a $180,000 salary. It concluded with a formal offer, a one-time, non-negotiable payment of $425,000, representing her half of the home's equity, plus an additional $25,000 for her share of the disputed contents. Her lawyer, a shark who charged $500 an hour, read the letter and advised her to take the deal immediately. He explained that any attempt to challenge the trust would cost her millions in legal fees with less than a 1% chance of success. She was trapped by her own signature, by her own assumptions. She accepted. The social fallout was just as devastating. The story became the talk of Atlanta's elite circles. Devin was no longer the woman who had bravely upgraded her life. She was the fool who had walked away from a billion-dollar fortune for a mid-level banker. Friends who had once admired her ambition now avoided her calls. The invitations to parties and gallery openings stopped coming. She was a pariah, a cautionary tale whispered about over cocktails in Buckhead. Marcus, true to form, made a swift business decision. The weekend after the news broke, while Devin was staying at a hotel, he packed her things and left them with the concierge of her building. He sent her a text. "This is too much drama for me. I wish you the best." His investment had failed to yield a return, so he cut his losses. He was a shark, just as he'd said, and she was now, officially, fish food. Suddenly, Devin was truly alone. She used a portion of her settlement to rent a small condo in Sandy Springs, a far cry from Chastain Park or even the trendy Alpharetta complex. Her $450,000, after paying her lawyer's exorbitant fees, was not the ticket to a life of leisure she'd imagined. It was a starting fund for a life she had to rebuild from scratch at 40 years old, with a reputation in tatters. The Max Mara coat hung in her new, smaller closet, a bitter reminder of a life she'd touched but never truly possessed. She had her upgrade after all. After she had upgraded from the quiet, loving home of a billionaire to a lonely condo with a view of a highway. Sometimes we make choices thinking we know all the facts. When was a time a decision you made was upended by new information? Let us know your story in the comments. A year and a half later, Zaire stood on a stage at Morehouse College, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the historic campus. The air was filled with the sound of applause. He was dressed in a simple but impeccably tailored dark suit, the Timex still on his wrist. He had just finished announcing the launch of the Achebe Innovation Fund, a $100 million endowment dedicated to providing scholarships, seed funding, and mentorship for Black student entrepreneurs at HBCUs across the country. His life had changed, but he had not. The publication of his wealth had forced him out of the shadows, but he had refused to let it alter the core of who he was. He still lived in the Chastain Park house, though he'd remodeled the kitchen and turned Devin's old closet into a small library. He still drove a Honda, though he'd upgraded to the newest model. The money, which he had once seen as something to be shielded and protected, was now a tool, a resource, to build something lasting, something that would empower others. "True wealth is not a number in a bank account," he said to the crowd of bright, hopeful students. "It is not the car you drive or the watch you wear. True wealth is found in the integrity of your character, the strength of your community, and the legacy you build for those who come after you. It's about creating opportunities, not just accumulating assets. His public profile had grown, but he managed it on his own terms. He gave few interviews, and when he did, he spoke not about his wealth, but about the fund, about financial literacy, about the importance of investing in Black-owned businesses. He became a different kind of Atlanta giant, not for the money he had, but for the good he was doing with it. He still found his greatest peace in the simple things. He hiked the trails of Chastain Park almost every morning, the familiar paths a source of quiet contemplation. He spent weekends in his workshop, the smell of sawdust and wood stain a comforting balm. He was still Zaire Achebe, the man who liked to work with his hands, the man who found value in things that last. The only difference was that now, the world knew it. One Saturday, while shopping at his local farmer's market, he saw her. Devin was across the crowded aisle buying vegetables from a stall. She looked different, thinner. The expensive clothes were gone, replaced by simple jeans and a sweater. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. She looked older, tired. There was a hardness in her eyes he'd never seen before. Their eyes met for a brief, electric moment. He saw a flicker of a dozen emotions on her face: shame, anger, regret, and a deep, bottomless sorrow. He simply gave her a small, polite nod, a gesture not of forgiveness but of acknowledgement, of closure. He then turned back to the vendor and paid for his tomatoes. When he looked again, she was gone, swallowed by the crowd. He walked home, the canvas bag of fresh produce feeling solid and real in his hand. He didn't feel triumph or satisfaction. He felt a quiet sense of peace. He had been underestimated, betrayed, and left behind. But in losing what he thought he had discovered what was truly his. He had found his purpose, a purpose that extended far beyond the walls of his home, beyond the confines of a balance sheet. That evening, as the sun set, painting the Atlanta sky in shades of orange and purple, he sat on his back porch. He thought about the nature of value. Devin had been a collector of expensive things, but she had failed to recognize the most valuable thing in her life. She had traded authentic, quiet love for the glittering illusion of status. She hadn't understood that some things, the most important things, don't have a price tag. You can't upgrade your character. You can't buy integrity. And true, lasting love will never, ever be found on a balance sheet. He had learned that true wealth isn't about what you can acquire, but about what you cannot lose. It's the quiet strength within you, the peace in your own heart, and the unwavering knowledge of your own worth, even when no one else can see it. Zaire Achebe was one of the richest men in the world, and he was finally, completely, at peace. What do you think is the most important measure of a person's wealth? Is it their bank account, their character, or something else entirely? Join the conversation below, and thank you for being a part of the Love Beyond Pride community.